Feel most welcome. In the meantime, kindly type your name, affiliation, and the country so that other participants can get to know you, that you are here with us. You have joined us for this wonderful webinar on peatlands, wetlands, and climate change. So under the chat, kindly type your name, organization, and country so that we can introduce ourselves to other participants. So kindly type your name, affiliation or organization, and your country where you are joining us from, so that other participants can get to know you. Thank you. For those who are joining, welcome. We are just about to start. Kindly introduce yourself through the chat option. State your name, your affiliation or country, and of course, where you are joining us from, which is your country. Okay, so allow us to start, and a big welcome to all of you who have joined us as presenters, and also to all of you who have joined us to listen to this webinar and under the stream of transboundary wetland management, which is this webinar is under the title Wetlands, Peatlands, and Climate Change. So we have lined up for you our great presenters, and of course, a great team of panelists to help us delve into this great topic of wetlands, peatlands, and climate change. I am your host. I am Leonard Akwan, and of course, I'll be assisted by Carlos Sanchez, who is my colleague from the GIZ side. So within this presentation, this webinar is hosted, is co-convened by Greifswald Maya Center. It will be for 2 hours, and we have lined for you presenters, one of which will provide for us an opening and keynote address is Mr. Zuri Muas, who is the regional lead at Regional Collaboration Center for East Africa, which is a center for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Of course, we have two presentations from John Peters, who is from the Greifswald Maya Center, who will give us a presentation on peatlands and climate change. And then we will have another presentation from Sama Al-Shahawi, who is also from the Greifswald Maya Center. And Sama will give us a presentation, which is a very practical presentation from the survey they did here in the Nile Basin. The presentation is under the title, The Carbon Emissions Avoidance Potential from the Nile Basin Countries. He led the field campaigns for this study, so he'll be sharing it with us today. And then, of course, we'll have some round of discussion under those two presentations. And then we will have a paper presented by Jonas Franke, who is from Germany and is coming from the background of remote sensing solutions consultancy, and of course, also having done some research on these areas from the university. And he will be delivering a presentation on the effectiveness of wetland restoration and identifying threats via monitoring wetland use intensity, a case study from Rwanda. And then, of course, we'll have a presentation from Maurice Ogoma and Rodian Sabiambo. And this presentation is an application of community climate change adaptation assessment, which is a toolkit for climate change adaptation planning. And the case study here is Yala Wetland on Lake Victoria. And then, of course, we'll have a panel, and within this panel, we have panelists from Global Peatland Initiative, and also we have a panelist from the government of Kenya, and then, of course, we have a panelist from the government of South Sudan. So, welcome, and we will start. So I will call upon, so kindly remember to post your questions under the Q&A. If you have any question, kindly post them there, and we'll try our best to answer all questions. And then, of course, during the discussions, if you will have the time, please feel free to raise your hand, click that button for raising the hand, and then we'll give you a chance to speak to us. So welcome, and without much ado, may I call our first presenter, Mr. Zuri Muas. Welcome, Zuri.
Hi, Leonard. Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me see if I can also get my video to work. So, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me also acknowledge the colleagues from the NBI Secretariat, GIZ, GMC, the Ministry of Water and Environment here in Uganda, and all the distinguished Let me pick up from the intro. This is Zuri Muas. I'm the regional lead at RCC Kampala. We've been based in Kampala since 2013, and our work covers all aspects of providing support to the implementation of the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. Initially, we were set to support the regional distribution of the clean development mechanism. So working with market instruments and carbon pricing is still a focus for us. Yes, and we're based here in Nakasero at the EADB building. I'm not sure, Leonard, do you have some slides? I don't see if you're projecting anything, or I can try and project from my side. There were some slides.
Can project.
Oh.
Patrick will project for you, please.
So I have to say, I'll just continue. I have to confess I was a little bit daunted by the session. I'm by no means an expert on peatlands, and you've really just made a roll call of real world expertise in the subject. But anyway, preparing for the session, I learned about a new concept for me, polluter so from the outset, thank you very much for teaching me something new. And yeah, as I said, I'm really honored to be talking to such experts in their field about what it is that we do at UFCCC and RCC Kampala. So we can go to the next slide. Is it projecting yet? I don't see anything yet.
Sorry, please,
Otherwise,
please project.
Okay, let me try and do it from this side. Okay, is that working?
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay.
It's loading.
So, okay.
Yes, we can now see your screen.
That's good, thank you. So I just want to talk to you briefly about the Paris Agreement and how this may be relevant to the work that you're doing on peatlands. So I think everyone has heard about the Paris Agreement now, but I just wanted to share with you what the Paris is to me. And to me, the cycle is really a good way to imagine it, where you have planning, the implementation, and then again, the review, and then starting again. So maybe you've seen something similar before. And let me just at the planning stage. This is very topical at the moment because the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions, are to end of last year. And these nationally determined contributions are bottom-up plans submitted by each party to the Paris Agreement, indicating how much they are able to contribute to fighting climate change. So yeah, we're going through that cycle right now that they're due. And about 5 years ago, we had the first cycle where most countries submitted their first NDC. Also in this planning stage, we have other instruments that are being submitted, like the National Adaptation Plan. And then to the next phase of the cycle is implementation, but keeping in mind that there's an overlap. Each of these parts of the cycle overlap and learn from each other each time that you go around. Implementation of the previous NDC is going on while the new NDC is being formulated, and also the implementation from the previous cycle provides the basis for further implementation. And implementation also means other processes outside of the UNFCCC are going on. So NDC implementation plan to guide action and also to mobilize donor resources. And critically, the implementation plans build on the NDC. So what was specified in the NDC, for this group, was the land use change sector adequately specified in the NDC such that it can be then reflected in the implementation plan. So implementation also means reporting, and reporting under the Paris Agreement is mandatory. But in saying that, there is flexibility, particularly for LDCs and also developing countries. And then finally, after the implementation stage, so the review stage,
Did we lose Suri? think we lost him.
Okay, I think I'm back. Sorry, I must have dropped out there. Do you
Okay.
get me again?
Yes, we are getting you loud and clear.
Okay, let me just try and load the screen again. Bear with me. Is that coming through on your side, Leonard?
Yes, we have the screen here.
Okay. So I was just, I think I was moving into the next phase, which is the review phase. And this is where the reports are reviewed through a standardized process that is facilitative and non-punitive. And also in this review stage, we have the global stock take. So the next global stock take will be happening in 2023. And then this is when global progress is considered and forms a basis for starting the cycle again. So hopefully at this stage, there's a push to boost ambition, and that each successive NDC is broader in scope and also more ambition in terms of emission reduction pledges. So this overall cycle is becoming increasingly interesting to donors. They're looking to the NDCs as it is a global process that has elements of standardization across countries, and therefore the implementation plans are an obvious source of interest for gauging what is needed in the country regarding action on climate change. So let me just move to NDCs here in the region. So here we've got some screen grabs of all of the NDCs that have been submitted in the NBI countries. As I mentioned, for this round of planning, NDCs were due at the end of December. And until now, we've received from Rwanda, we've received from Ethiopia, and also Kenya. And all the other NBI countries are still in the planning phase. I was able to partially confirm that most of the other countries intend to submit their NDCs before COP26, which is in November. So I had a quick scan through the NDCs here in the region relevant for NBI with an eye to what is happening regarding wetlands and peatlands. And there's, as you'd expect, given the variability amongst the countries, there's quite a range. So some countries have no mention. There are two countries that stand out in a way with clear links to wetlands in their NDCs, and this is Uganda and also Rwanda. So Uganda clearly mentions wetlands as a priority area for adaptation, and already mentioned the potential of wetlands to act as sinks. And yeah, that NDC from Uganda was from the previous cycle in 2015. So I'm guessing that in their updated NDC, they will have more detail in this regard. But there's no specific mention of peatlands. For Rwanda, in their 2020 NDC, wetland restoration is mentioned as an adaptation activity. So overall, I didn't see any specific mention of peatlands in the NDCs of the NBI countries, and this is probably a reflection that this is, in terms of the research, this is a new field, and this hasn't been connected up yet with the policymakers that are working on developing the NDCs. And I see, where I see an opportunity where the research that is being done by the NBI and similar is very relevant to the NDC development process that is going on right now. So I urge you to get involved in the stakeholder consultation process that are ongoing in your countries to ensure that the land use change and the peatlands are adequately reflected. So now I just want to talk a little bit about reporting, the next part of that Paris Agreement cycle. And here are some screen grabs, various reports from the MBI countries. We've got national communications, which are due countries, and also biannual update reports, which are due every 2 years. So, of course, nowhere in the UNFCCC or the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Agreement are wetlands or peatlands specifically mentioned. Where this topic really manifests itself is in our process is when it comes to reporting and accounting for countries' emissions. However, similar to the planning stage, when the NDCs are developed, the reporting stage also grants countries flexibility. For example, the LDCs may report, but it is at their discretion, and also the developing countries, which I think in this group includes Egypt and Kenya, have flexibility in reporting based on their national capacities. And yeah, so when I say flexibility, it really means that they can take a national approach that's themselves. And even for developed countries, reporting on emissions or removals from peatlands is very much a niche area where they also have flexibility. So all of this is to say that I wasn't able to identify anywhere here in the national reporting that's done by the MBI countries reporting specifically on peatlands. In some cases, this isn't specifically explicitly stated, but it's inferred. Okay, so then I just want to conclude by having one slide, or having a look at the COP26 that is coming up at the end of the year. It's scheduled for early November in Glasgow, and is to be held at the Scottish Event Campus in the Glasgow Science Centre. So you have some aerial views there of those nice exhibition areas. And also in the bottom centre, you have a photo of the Cabinet Minister, Alok Sharma, who is the COP President Designate from the UK side. And right now, Alok Sharma doesn't have any other portfolio other than this COP presidency. So to me, that really reflects how seriously the UK is taking the organisation of this COP. And I can't remember the last time we had a COP president that was really full-time allocated to the job. Yeah, the UK has been, you've probably seen a lot of publicity already around this event, and they've been billing this as the largest heads of state conference that they've ever organised, and is being said by many that it's the last chance for the world to come together, a good shot at averting calamitous climate change. So coming to the content a little bit more, to my knowledge, there are no agenda items under the convention. Developing countries that are particularly relevant to wetlands and peatlands. However, our executive secretary, and there's a photo there of her at the bottom left, Patricia Espinosa, she outlined 4 areas that spell success, at least from her perspective, on the negotiations. So the first one was around finance. So it's there's a promise made to developing countries, and this should be kept. It's the pledge to mobilize $100 billion a year in climate finance annually by 2020. The second point is about the negotiations in the Paris Agreement. So it's about wrapping up the final item under the Paris Agreement, which is Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And this is the article on emission markets and other cooperative approaches. So all other aspects of the Paris Agreement, there's now a rule book to do the implementation, but this is still an outstanding area. The third one is on ambition, so about raising climate ambition and also adaptation ambition and building resilience to the impacts on climate change. And the fourth point is about engaging with non-party stakeholders, and that no voice or solution is left behind, that everyone has a role to play and everyone must be involved. So those are the 4 success areas that we're looking for. And so I began telling you how I learned about the concept of polluter culture, and hopefully this high-level overview of the Paris Agreement and what we're aiming for in Glasgow introduced you to 1 or 2 new concepts as well. So thank you very much for your time, and back to you, Leonard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Suri, for your insightful presentation, taking us through the Paris Agreement cycle, and then taking us through the NDCs that have been developed by countries in the Nile Basin, and whether peatlands are part and parcel of them, and of course, finally sharing about the upcoming COP meeting in Glasgow. Thank you so much for that presentation. Kindly, please, if you have any question, post it in the Q&A. If the Q&A is not active for your case, kindly post your question under the chat, and we will try our level best to answer those questions. Now I'm calling upon, we are moving to presentations, and the first presentation is going to come from Jan Peters on peatlands and climate change. I humbly request that we are there to the time slotted, so that we are on time with every presentation and the panel discussion. Welcome, Jan Peters, for your presentation. Thank you, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me well. Best greetings here from Germany to all of you out there in the virtual space or in Kampala. I will try to share my presentation now. As you know, I will replace today Professor Hans Josten, who couldn't make it to give the talk today, but I hope that I can replace him here incredibly. Can you see my presentation? Yes. Okay.
I see it very clear. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so my topic is to bring you into the issues of peatlands and climate change. The last 20 years were the warmest years on record, with increasing risks for food and water security. Here you see the temperature stripes for Uganda since 1901. So climate change is real. And climate change triggers disasters caused in 2017 thousands of deaths and $320 billion in losses. Frequency and severity of disasters have been increased since 1950, like floods, droughts, fires, extreme temperatures. This, we all agree, has to stop. And as Suri already presented, the Paris Agreement has made the world simple. We have one common goal: to keep temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. 2 degrees Celsius means 0 emissions by 2050. And it is simple because it means that me, you, we all together, and also the peatlands, has no excuses anymore. They have to go to 0, which this graph from the IPCC special report on the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal shows. So the longer we wait, the faster we have to act. But the Paris Agreement also says that the reduction has to happen in the context of sustainable development and of efforts to eradicate poverty. So we have to break radically with routines from the past, also with respect to peatlands and in all regions of the world. First, I would like to clarify the terms. A wetland is an area with prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. And peatlands are parts of these lands, so that peatlands are always wetlands in an area of land which naturally accumulated peat layer on its surface. Peat is accumulated material consisting of at least 30% dry mass of dead organic material. And a mire is a peatland on which peat is currently formed and accumulated, so a functioning natural peatland. In living peatlands, biomass production is larger than the decay. Dead plants accumulate as peat. And this peat accumulates during thousands of years and stores concentrated carbon in thick layers. As you can see here from Lesotho, a peat from 2 meters depth. Peat is accumulated through water saturation. And global peatland distribution is clearly reflected by a zonal pattern. So it's clearly related to distribution of precipitation. In the very dry subtropical areas, we won't find peatlands, only maybe in the high mountain areas. Peatlands are found in almost every country and they are very diverse. Worldwide, we have 4 million square kilometers of peatlands. But peatlands face the Cinderella syndrome. For Ramsar, they are too dry because they have no open water. For CBD, they are too mountainous. For UNFCCC, they are too small because only few % of land surface. For the CCD, they are too wet, no desertification. For all, too frightful. For all, too unknown. So for example, the Ramsar Convention overlooked peatlands during 25 years. Although the city of Ramsar in Iran is surrounded by peatlands. Just in the back, you see the hotel where the Ramsar Convention was actually signed. And just in front, there's peat. Also in the UNFCCC, many parties don't recognize that they have peat. For example, in the COP in 2006 in Nairobi, representatives said in Kenya there is no peat. And just 10 kilometers away from the Nairobi Convention venue, you see this, and this is peat. Also in Panama, the same. We didn't know we had peat swamps, and also there large areas of peatlands just outside the conference venue. What it is all about. Living peatlands are climate neutral on the short term. The CO2 sink is balanced more or less out by methane sources. Over the long run, as carbon is stored for a long time in the peat and methane is removed from the atmosphere after some years, they are sinks, but very slow sinks. But while covering only 3% of world's land area, peatlands contain 500 gigatons of carbon, which is twice the carbon stock of world's total forest biomass. So huge amounts. To put it into perspective, a 15 centimeter thick layer of peatland contains per hectare more carbon than a high carbon stock tropical rainforest. And the problems of peatlands for the climate are caused by drainage. As you can see here from the border between Rwanda and Burundi. Because peat is like gherkins. When you remove the conserving water, the organic matter rots away. By drainage, peat is oxidized, greenhouse gases are released, CO2, nitrous oxide, and also methane from the ditches. And the relation is very clear and very easy. The deeper the water table, the more greenhouse gases are emitted. As a rule of thumb, 10 centimeters of drainage means 5 tons of CO2 equivalent more emissions. So we have deeply drained grasslands on peat emits 30 tons CO2 per hectare and year, which is driving 145 kilometers with a middle-class car, like here in Germany. And for example, 1 kg of cheese produced on peatlands has a carbon footprint of 55 kilograms of CO2. 1 liter of milk produced from dairy farming on peatlands has 2.4 liters of petrol, the same carbon footprint. Also in the tropics, oil palm on peat in the tropics emit even more, double, 60 tons per CO2 per hectare in year, which is driving 300,000 kilometers by car, every hectare, every year. Globally, drained peatlands emit 2 gigatons CO2 per year, which is 0.4% of the land produces 5% of all global emissions. And in some years, when we have these huge fires, for example, in Indonesia, but also in Russia and other countries, it is much more. Here you can see on this map the peatland emission per country, and we see that there is high global urgency for peatlands in many countries, also in Central African and Eastern African countries. But only very few parties, as Suri already mentioned in his talk, also for the Nile Basin, have mentioned peat and wetlands in their NDCs yet. For example, some big emitters like the European Union, Indonesia have done it. And also, as you can see here in the yellow circle, some of the Nile Basin Initiative parties are actually very good examples. The peatland differs very much from forest. This has to be clear because forest emission, the carbon in the wood, are related to the land use change, while peatland emissions, the carbon in the peat, is to the resulting land use afterwards. Peatland emissions are cumulative. To make it clear in the graph, this is how the emissions from forest react. If there is a decreasing rate of deforestation, we also have a decrease of annual greenhouse gas emissions. With peatlands, it's very different because if we have a decreasing rate of peatland drainage, we have still strongly increasing annual greenhouse gas emissions because they add up to the already peatland emissions. And these emissions not even fit into this graph. So drainage for agriculture is the most important cause of emissions. But we have another problem, which is subsidence, which is very little recognized so far. Because if the peat is oxidized after drainage, it goes up into the air, and of course the soil substance is lost. So here you can see from the Netherlands a bunker from Second World War, where you can clearly show the loss of peat soil during these decades, which is in this case practical because you can at least store your wood in a dry condition. And this is happened due to drainage, after which you lose 1 to 2 centimeters of peat annually. The Netherlands is the best example for this, which has started to drain peatlands 1,000 years ago and now has areas with 8 meters of subsidence. And the subsidence continues. As you could have seen in the other graph, the emissions continue as long as peatlands are drained. And in the tropics, subsidence is even 5 times faster, which is a problem, of course, because on the other side, we have rising sea levels. So in a time when the sea level is rising, the peatland surface goes down, which of course causes problem because many peatlands worldwide are in coastal and low-lying areas. For example, here in the Caribbean or in Southeast Asia, many coastal peatlands will, with continuing drainage, be flooded. And peatland subsidence will in this century lead to uncontrolled flooding of 10 to 20 million hectares of productive land worldwide. And this in a time where we are losing land when we need it the most for more people, for less poverty, and for replacing fossil fuels for a bioeconomy. So the only way can be to re-wet, make drained peatlands wet again. And the priority here are deeply drained tropical and temperate peatlands. And as many of these land are actually used They are not drained for nothing, not for fun. They are drained because they needed to be used. We have to also think about changes in land use. We have to find opportunities for wetland use, which we call paludiculture. Also here, the priority is on intensively used tropical and temperate peatlands, also applying to the peatlands of the Nile Basin. In the Nile Basin, for example, papyrus and other reed species can be a very important part of paludiculture production schemes. They can be used for construction and fuel, as they are already used nowadays, as you can see here on this picture from Kenya, as traditional materials to make very nice furnitures, but there are also new techniques applied where you can make like these construction boards or form bodies, which can be used in all kinds of industrial processes or as packaging, replacing plastics in the future. So there are a lot of opportunities. Here in Greifswald in Germany, we already built a whole mobile home, a whole house just out of products from paludiculture, from wetland plants grown in wet peatlands. So it is possible, and we urgently need also a technology exchange between North and South to make these products available also in other regions of the world. So to summarize, what do we have to do and why? We have to keep undrained peatlands wet to avoid all these problems. We have to re-wet drained peatlands to solve the problem, especially the carbon emissions. And we have to adapt land use, make it more wet to reduce the problems. And where and how do we have to apply that? The preservation of peatlands has to happen mostly in the tropical countries, and re-wetting and adapted land use paludiculture in the tropics and temperate and boreal zone. So for that we need better mapping of peatlands and land use planning. We have to develop drainage-free livelihoods, including paludicultures, and we have to develop moist crop practices, ground covering, no tillage, and so on. So the message is clear: keep wet peatlands wet, make drained peatlands wet again, and if you have to use the peatlands because there's high land pressure, use them wet in paludiculture. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John Peters, for that insightful and informative presentation. Please kindly share your questions under Q&A. And if the button of Q&A is not active for your case, just post the questions and the chat. That is still welcome. Okay, of course, questions will come. Now we move to the next presentation, which is more practical and very and driven from the Nile Basin region. And this will be presented by Dr. Shama El-Shahawi from the Greifswald Maya Center. Shama, welcome with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. I will put my presentation on now. One moment. Okay. So I hope that everybody can see my presentation right now. I just need to put it on. Yeah, so thanks, Jan. Thanks, Dr. I can't see what is happening right now. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit more technical after Jan and Dr. Suri. They have shared good information on the UNFCCC, and Jan has provided some information on peatlands around the globe, the most associated problems, and what are the solutions we work on in Greifswald. I think I've seen in the chat an entry from our colleagues at Ramza saying that Ramza recognizes peatlands at the moment, and this is actually quite true. And our colleague, Professor Yostin, is currently working on a manual for peatlands restoration. So this is quite, things are going on the process. Yeah, so
Sama, can you switch your presentation to presentation mode? Because we still see the editing mode.
yeah, this works now?
No, not yet. Maybe you try the reading mode. This book just close to the presentation. Sometimes that works better.
Does this work now? Does it work like this?
Yes,
Yeah,
now it's there.
Okay.
That's
So yeah, my name is Dr. Samuel Shehawi. I work in Greifswald, and sorry for all the, I'm a bit confused with the screen share, although I'm not so old yet, but I think I seem very old right now. Yeah, I will talk about the peatland distribution in the Nile Basin, particularly in the Nile equatorial lakes, and also a little bit about the other countries like South Sudan and Ethiopia, and also show a little bit on the problem with the CO2 emissions that we estimate are happening from the peatlands in the Nile Basin. So the project partners, we worked in this project with Wetland International, and this was funded by GIZ and through the ICI and the Ministry of Environment in Germany, and we worked together through the Nile Basin Initiative on the ground. So yeah, peatlands, Jan has mentioned before that the biomass or like the carbon stocks in peatlands are 15 times higher than tropical forests or like a proper tropical forest trees. And in this figure, you can see the difference between the below ground biomass as in peat and above ground biomass. And there you see in tropical peatlands is so much higher carbon stocks are stored in the ground. And in the Nile Basin, the emissions from drained peatlands as a percentage of emissions from fossil fuel and cement are quite high. And this is also has to do with the fact that a lot of countries do not use so much fossil fuel. So in countries where fossil fuel use is very high, then of course the percentage of drained peatlands might seem that they are lower, but the absolute value might be higher. Nevertheless, for NDC targets, peatlands may represent a big issue. And that's why we came to the realization, okay, we need to work in the tropics, we need to work in the Congo Basin, but also Nile Basin countries, and also Southern Africa, Western Africa. Peatlands in the climate change mitigation would contribute through like the different scenarios. We estimated that if peatlands are not rewetted at all, then they would continue to emit a huge amount of greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide, and this would lead to a higher emission by 2050. If we start rewetting, the question is when. If we start rewetting now, then we have a chance to meet the emission targets by 2050. But the later we start, the more problems we have. So about the peatlands and the Nile Basin, this is the workflow we followed. First was the question of where are exactly the peatlands, what kind of information do we know about them so that we can come up with a peatland area, and then test them in the field to see where we actually, do we see these maps right? So we use satellite images, remote sensing techniques. And then we combine that with ground truthing to check on the soil to see that. After that, we start to look into which peatlands are actually drained and then how to deal with the emission factors for that. And I will come to these details later. So the first part about the mapping and the field validation. From our mapping, from the remote sensing data, we see that the peatland area in the Nile Basin is mostly in the Sud and South Sudan, where we have the highest potential of peatland distribution. However, this is the least part to be confirmed as well. But in the Nile equatorial lakes, then here I'm talking about Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Kenya. And there you have also 40% of the peatlands of the Nile Basin. Ethiopia comes also with a little bit of peatlands in there, especially in the high mountains that are at the headwaters of the Nile Basin. In total, 30,000 square kilometers might not be so high, but this is 3 million hectares of peatlands, possible peatlands. In the upper zone in the Nile equatorial lake, so here, I'm talking about Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, we see the peatland distribution in the black shapes, and then we have also all our data from either from literature or also from the fieldwork we have done in 2019. And we see that the peatland distribution is very high around Lake Victoria in all the countries, but it's also very high in the mountain, headwater mountain areas. And interestingly, in the Nile Basin also that the transboundary wetlands are also home to a lot of peatlands. So we see that on the boundaries between Rwanda and Burundi and Rwanda and Tanzania, there are a lot of peatlands. The same situation between Uganda and Kenya, and between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. This means that any changes to happen in the future will not only require a national plan, but also collaboration across borders. Our pictures from the ground truthing that we did in the 2019. So this is a 8-meter core that we found in Tanzania. And actually we went there and this was supposed to be a forest protection area, and around it there were vast peatland area. And we communicated with the wetland officers there, and nobody really has thought about this idea that like peat exists and that the protection was focusing so much on the forest biomass for climate change mitigation, but then they missed the climate change mitigation from under the ground. This is the problem mostly, that people cannot see what's under the ground. A similar issue here, we see like 4 meters of peat. This is from a drained peatland near Kasese in Uganda. This is a peatland crossed by one of the main roads. And we can see the peat in the, like for some people who are familiar with peat, this might look a bit like a degraded peat, not in a very good shape, let's say. In general, the peatlands in the Nile Basin exist in all kinds of parts of the landscape. They are in the mountain zones, like very small swamps, and sometimes they are also in valleys around the river. They're around the lake margin. They exist also like in small depressions. In general, very vast, very different from each other, and research about most of these systems is pretty basic, we can say, and even in Greifswald, what we think we know is very limited as well. But however, from that we can draw a lot of information also for climate change mitigation still. So the second part was to look from the optical satellite at how much percentage of these peatlands look like they are in drained state. So we look to see if there are ditches in a peatland, if the peatland is looks like it's bare soil, that there is a vegetation change or land use activities happening there. And from that, we try to draw information on percentage of drained peatlands out of the total amount of peatlands. And this is the drainage map that we have created for the Nile equatorial lakes. And you can see that in Rwanda and Burundi, the drainage state is pretty high, that a lot of peatlands are used heavily. In Uganda, it may seem like it's not so much affected. However, the map was made in 2014, and what we saw in the field in 2019 might be a little bit different, and that might have to do with an accelerating change in land use change. Particularly in the west of Uganda, there seems to be a lot of land use change affecting the peatlands, but also around Lake Kampala with urbanization, like around Lake Victoria near Kampala with urbanization, there seem to be bigger problems. Also around Lake Kyoga. The different uses exist. The biggest of them, of course, the most industrial one was in Rwanda, where peat is being extracted for energy. This is a picture of a peat factory that is being built at the moment. And it is expected, the peatland is actually a transboundary peatland across the border between Rwanda and Burundi. And in this peatland, the peat is about 20 meters deep, and the plans are to extract up to 8 to 10 meters of peat for energy production. Of course, this can have an impact on climate change mitigation, but it can also affect the hydrology of the region, which may lead also other peatlands across the border to emit more greenhouse gases, or the ecosystem functionality may not work very well. Another use that we see here is from rice, but also from sugarcane. We saw in Kenya and other agriculture where it may seem like it's wet agriculture. However, these might actually contribute to not only higher emissions of CO2, but also higher emissions of methane. This is a road in Uganda, and you see me standing in the ditch, and peat is uncovered from the ground. And this is a very small road, but other larger road may exist also in the planning. They cross through the peatland, considered normal soil, and that leads to the peats to start to subside, but also the road qualities may in the long term require more maintenance when they cross such peatlands, because the peat level starts to subside, and then the road also breaks down very easily. From all these land use and so on, we come to the point where we want to calculate how much, in order of magnitude, how much CO2 is being emitted from those drained peatland. I go back to the same picture that Jan has showed, that if you start to drain peatlands, you start to have higher emissions of CO2 and nitric oxide, and also sometimes methane if you have such fields of rice, but also sometimes from the ditches, drainage ditches. That in the meantime happening with subsidence, which may impact the sustainability of the land use activity you do on a peatland. Those peatlands, for every 10 centimeters of drainage, that means that the water level is below the peat surface. The peat is in the air, 10 centimeters of the peat are exposed to oxygen, then that would lead to 5 tons of CO2. However, we use the values from the IPCC values where because we don't have emission factors yet for tropical peatlands, or at least we have for Southeast Asia, but that we cannot say for Africa. And this is also another field that we need to figure out how much actually greenhouse gases are emitted from peatlands in relation to the drop in water level. But to simplify things for us, we use 14 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. However, if at least the drainage is mostly at least 50 centimeters to be the peatland to be used, which means that at least 25 tons of CO2. Bear in mind that 25 tons of CO2 equivalent is different than 14 tons of CO2. I just want to say that the problem is not very simple. However, we want to get an order of magnitude of how much these emissions are. And when we calculate the emissions, we see on the graph here, like the emission from peatlands, from drained peatlands per year on a national level. And then we can see that Uganda and Rwanda have the highest emissions from drained peatland, followed by Burundi and Ethiopia. But also the emissions from Kenya and DR Congo may seem small, but we are talking only about the peatlands that are within the Nile Basin boundaries. That means that Kenya as a national emission might be higher, The same for Tanzania. But because Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda fall completely within the Nile Basin, so they have a higher emission factor. From Uganda and Rwanda, of course, it would be interesting to include, since they include wetland restoration in the national targets for climate change adaptation, but also maybe for Uganda, also for mitigation. We think the peatlands would play a very important role in reaching those goals, but also first realize that there is a problem. The emission from those peatlands, if we don't act at all in a business as usual, there will be an emission of equal almost 700 megatons of CO2. However, if we could start to re-wet all in 2025, if, like Dr. Suri has said, if in 2023 the country start to include peatlands in the national targets and start to re-wet them in 2025, there can still be 700 megatons of CO2 to be avoided if we re-wet everything. If we take the halfway road, then we will still lose much CO2 emissions that could be avoided by 2050. So the things to consider here is that peatlands emissions from the drained peatlands in the Nile Basin countries may be important, and they could actually represent more than 5% of the total national greenhouse gas emission. And the other figure we are talking about the percentage of fossil fuel, then it's very high. However, of the national total national greenhouse gas emission, these may still be very important to consider. The same for Rwanda, for Burundi as well, and perhaps also Kenya and Ethiopia. Peatlands are not a beast to tame, because the problem is often that for urbanization and to build a community and so on, sometimes the peatlands present a challenge. However, these challenges can be worked out with by building with nature-based solutions, and not only building that would result in an irreversible loss of ecosystem services, which can be greenhouse gases and also loss of headwater regulation, which is rather important in the Nile Basin. The peatlands climate change adaptation may also be very important. The role that peatlands play in regulating water flow, like in the Sud also, how the peatlands slow the water flow and they increase the evapotranspiration, which actually results in higher rainfall emission. Rainfall in the higher the headwater regions. Also, biodiversity could be affected, like species like the shoebill or endangered species that are dependent on peatlands may be affected as well. Models for using the peatlands as a sustainable productive land, actually the Nile Basin could be a leading place to start with, because most of the peatlands are covered with papyrus, and it's pretty monotone situation where papyrus is very dominant in the landscape. And this actually could work to the benefit that papyrus could be used pretty well. There is a history of thousands of years of using papyrus, from the Egyptians using it for paper, but also people using it for fuel. I read papers from the 70s looking into value chain for papyrus to be used for industrial purposes. And as Jan said, we have experiences in the north where reeds are being used for more modern uses from biomass, and not only on a local scale, but it can be upscaled into modern value chain. Some of those can be that the papyrus can be dried and made into pellets for renewable energy. It can also be made from built-in material for insulation of houses. It can be also for making blocks of wooden blocks and so on. It can be used for ecologists, for ecotourism. For furniture, the traditional use can be revitalized again, but also biodegradable products like packaging material can also be very interesting. And papyrus is a very interesting plant and can be used in a lot of different things. And the thing is, we do not have to invent new things. I think even looking in the past uses of papyrus can lead us to a lot of sustainable land use from peatlands. So yeah, peat must be wet. If it is not wet, we should act together to re-wet it for humanity, for sustainable life on Earth, and for forever. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sama, for that detailed presentation, which is very rich with the data that was collected from the field. I have seen questions in the Q&A, and I've also seen some questions in the chat. Please keep them rolling in. We want to, for purposes of time, we want to briefly just pose some questions to the three presenters. When I see the questions that are rolling in, the common thread is that when it comes to peatlands, it is not in the agenda of the Nile Basin countries, or it is not in the agenda even for Africa. You hardly hear of peatlands issues in Africa. And from the presentation which has been given by Suri, you understand that peatlands are not even in the NDC, despite their huge mitigation potential. Or if they are there, they are under wetlands. So then the common thread, the common question that is coming in is that, is it an issue of definition that peatlands, we call it with other names, or is it an issue of data? There is lack of data so that these peatlands then can become issue in Africa or in Nile Basin? Or is it also an issue of how we package peatlands importance? Because mostly we package peatlands as very crucial for mitigation, but we find that in the communities that we are coming from, we find that for them, they look at these peatlands areas for agriculture, they look for these peatlands areas for other things of water supply, not necessarily interested in whether these peatlands can absorb carbon or not. So this is the common question that is arising. So why is it not a common agenda in Africa or in the Nile Basin? Is it definition, is it data, or is it how we package it for mitigation, but not other areas? So please, any response from the three presenters, then we can move on to other presentations. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can start on that. I think, first of all, it's a lack of data and knowledge on the peatlands in Africa, because so far it was always considered not to be a big issue in the tropics in general. But in the last decades, especially fueled by the catastrophic events in Southeast Asia, what has happened there, it came more and more on the agenda also for tropical countries, that peatlands actually play a huge role in the carbon cycle, especially in the land use sector. So knowledge is one issue, but the other issue is, of course, connected to knowledge is the awareness, that there's very little awareness. There's little awareness on the terminology, how to bring it in. And peatlands are, when you want to understand them, they are rather complex. So you need, beside knowledge, you also need the experts on the ground. And this is all interlinked. So we have to build up, not completely from the scratch, but we have to really accelerate capacity building, awareness raising among policymakers, but also among scientists, among the general public, to really appreciate and recognize these functions more. And one other thing is this kind of confusion. It's not a really confusion with wetlands. I try to clarify that. So living peatlands are always wetlands because they have to be wet to be living peatlands. But the issues with the inventories towards the UNFCCC is always that when you drain a peatland, they are not wetlands anymore because they are not wet. They are drained, and then they come into the in the LULUCF sector, the land use sector, into other categories like croplands, like grasslands, like peat extraction. And then you also have to focus on that because they are still peatlands. They are not mires and wetlands anymore, but they are still peatlands. And then actually the big problems with the high emissions, which my colleague Sama presented, are happening. So these are the things which need to be better understood by better communication, I think. So awareness raising is always very much connected to communication. And Diana Kopansky from the Global Peatlands Initiative is also here. So UN Environment is really taking it serious and bringing it forward also on the international level.
Thank you so much, Jans. I think we will move on to, unless the other presenters have something to say. If not, then we will move on to the next presentation. And this is from Jonas Franke. And the presentation is on the effectiveness of wetland restoration and identifying threats via monitoring wetland. Kindly, Jonas, please kindly observe the time for your presentation. Thank you so much, and go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name is Jonas Franke from Remote Sensing Solutions. I'm having the pleasure to present a little bit about, let's say, innovative approaches for mapping and monitoring wetlands and peatlands. I mean, we mainly at RSS are also partners in the Global Peatlands Initiative. We are trying to push technical developments since many years forward, where exactly we are aiming at decovering, let's say, the blank spots on the map. So to identify wetlands, to categorize wetlands, to map peatlands in order to, let's say, fill this gap of information that was apparently from the other presenters. So we're also working with GIZ since many years in different countries. So looking forward to, let's say, have a exchange here. So I'm talking about the effectiveness of wetland restoration and identifying threats via monitoring wetland use intensity. And there it becomes very interesting when we not only look at wetlands, yes, no, or what type of wetlands, but also how intensively used are they. And I also speak on behalf of colleagues from the University of Bonn, which were partners in this study in Rwanda. Very quickly to the Rwandan wetlands. So they are, as in many other countries, they are integral to both. So on the one hand, there are national development action plans, and on the other side, they are parts of nature protection frameworks. So wetlands are a very critical, let's say, conflict zone of various interests. So this makes them very vulnerable and also threatened, particularly when we talk about nature protection frameworks. As Rwanda, with one of the highest population densities among African countries, anthropogenic pressure leads to an intensification of wetland use. And for example, I mean, there are different various uses, like, for example, food production in order to, let's say, secure the food security. There's energy production, like here, the image in the background, there's a dammed lake that is used for power plants. So peat extractions, we've heard that. So, but as Jan Peters was mentioned, the problem is often that the countries are not aware of where are the peatlands, or sometimes even not where are the wetlands. So in Rwanda, what was pretty unique already in 2008, there was a national wetland inventory. And this wetland inventory was a wetland delineation where they gave each wetland the attributes unconditional use, conditional use, and protected. But since 13 years, there was no update or improvement of this data set. So it's still unknown what is the status of the wetlands today in Rwanda. So to prioritize and plan interventions and to monitor the effectiveness of protection measures, for example, in Ramsar sites or other protected areas, up-to-date countrywide information is needed. And therefore, we are making use of the European Copernicus data, satellite Earth observation data, and in the project that was called Demo Wetlands, we were demonstrating this. Just very quickly, this is Rwanda. I mean, 2/3 of the eastern part of the country is part of the Nile Basin. you all are aware of the location of Rwanda. What kind of wetland types we are finding? So we have protected wetlands. We have peatlands, which is one peatland in Rwanda is a Ramsar site, Ugezi. Then we have, of course, many wetlands that are used for food production, so agriculturally used areas that are peatlands that are trained, wetlands that are trained. Then we have a very extreme use, which is peat extractions. We saw that in the previous presentation for energy production. We have, of course, intensive agriculture, but also the natural status where we have quite a high abundance of biodiversity. So it's a quite wide range of different wetland types we find in Rwanda. Let's make some, let's say, commercial for, let's say, the Copernicus data. Copernicus is a program from the European Commission and the European Space Agency. So they have several satellites that are constantly acquiring data of the globe. So for example, this one is a Sentinel-2 scenario. So every 5 days, we get a whole coverage of the globe using Sentinel-2. And for example, there are other satellites like radar satellites from Sentinel-1, which provides, for example, every 12 days for Africa, we get a full coverage radar imagery from this data constantly. So how we can make use of this data for wetland monitoring and peatland monitoring. So we were using these Copernicus data for a variety of wetland information products regarding wetland extent. So first of all, to inventorize wetlands, to map wetlands characteristics like water occurrence. We categorize the wetlands into the different Ramsar types. So they have a specific nomenclature. And these EO products, these Earth observation products, were created in direct response to the requirements of national stakeholders, but also like international conventions and initiatives like the Ramsar Convention, also the reporting requirements from the SDGs, the group on Earth observation on geo-wetlands. So we would like to serve a wider community with these kind of products. So for example, just simply, we did for the whole country of Rwanda, we did a wetland inventory using Copernicus data. So for example, with this data, we can feed into the SDG monitoring, for example, of sub-indicator 661, which is on the spatial extent of water-related ecosystems. This is just one example where this kind of data or products can feed into the different monitoring and reporting requirements. Let's talk about the more interesting things about the wetland use intensity. So we were learning that, for example, peatlands, the emissions of peatlands depend on how intensively used are these areas. So we developed a new innovative approach in order to use multi-temporal sentinel data in order to see how the wetlands and the peatlands are used over time. Not only the land cover, but how intensively is these areas used. So the wetland use intensity layer then differentiates intensively used areas, such as agricultural used areas or peat extraction areas, from less intensively used areas, such as natural or semi-natural areas or permanent water areas. So this is just one example. This is a wetland close to between the border of Rwanda and Burundi. So it's the Ruero wetland. You see in 10 meter spatial resolution, we were using all Sentinel-2 data that was available, for example, here in 2017. So, which means we can see how many changes we see in the time series of Sentinel-2 over time. And this product allows us to differentiate these kind of intensive agricultural areas, which appear here in red or orange, from, let's say, natural areas like the papyrus areas that you see here in the rather turquoise, greenish, bluish colors. You also see burned areas, for example, where the papyrus was burned. You identify, for example, in the southwestern part of this wetland, where slowly agriculture is actually encroaching the wetland. So you can kind of also see different threats to this kind of ecosystem. And this can be done on, let's say, on a national scale. Can I quickly share this interactive map? So you We have this interactive map. You can visit this website here where you see actually the whole data set. And when it comes to, for example, water occurrence, you see where actually permanent areas are flooded or temporarily wetlands occur. For example, here you see these are the rice cultivation areas where you definitely see that there are temporal water bodies. When we go to the wetland use intensity, you see also which parts of the wetlands are intensively used for agriculture, for peat extraction and things like that. And this allows us to assess the status of the wetlands. Let me go back to the presentation. So you are free to visit this website. We make all data available. Please make use of the data. It's there. Please, yeah, as I said, make use of it. It's worth to evaluate further. How can I switch back? Because this would, can I come to this presentation mode? So for example, using that layer, we can have unique footprints of the wetland use intensity. For example, this is the unique footprint of all wetland uses in Rwanda. For example, we see here in this histogram, the natural and semi-natural wetlands, the extensively used wetlands, and the more intensively used wetlands like rice paddies, peat extraction, and things like that. And another example is, for example, monitoring a Ramsar site, for example. This is Rugezi in the northern part of Rwanda, which is a really good protected area. And you could also use that information from the Copernicus data to see if your protection measures are effectively implemented. So you can identify threats. And this is the unique footprint of the Ramsar site, where you see that actually the natural and semi-natural wetlands are the dominating wetland uses, and you have just quite some small numbers of, let's say, threats or higher intensively used areas in this wetland. And for example, this could be used to monitor also Ramsar sites or protected areas or other wetlands in terms of how is this footprint changing over time, and are the protection measures, let's say, effective? So this comes to my last recommendation slide. So the Nile Basin Initiative is covering a super large area, and to get a full picture, also continuously, everybody should make use of the freely available Copernicus data that can support many NBI activities. So for example, wetlands can be observed at high temporal resolution. So as I said, every 5 days, there's an optical image. Every 12 days, there's a radar image. And this data allows to go far beyond land cover information. It can create information about, for example, land use intensity. So mapping the land use intensity is an innovative mean that can support the prioritization of protection measures, that can identify threats for wetlands or peatlands, and it can also be used to control the impact of protection measures, for example, when you implement a peatland restoration project, for example. So I thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you can, I'm looking forward to answer, or you can also contact me anytime after this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonas, for that great presentation. Please kindly share your questions under Q&A, and if it's not active, kindly share the same under the chat. And then, of course, Jonas and other presenters can answer it through that platform. Now we move to the next presentation, and this presentation is by Maurice Ogoma on the applicability of C3A2 tools for climate change adaptation case study of Yala wetland. Maurice, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Leonard. And my presentation will be on application of C3A2 tools and their applicability for use in the Nile Basin. Could you kindly share with me the slides, please?
Share your screen, run your slides from your side.
Okay, okay. Maurice, there is this green button on share screen. Please use it to share your screen, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Are you managing?
Not yet.
You have seen the share green button?
Yes, I'm trying to use it, but not yet.
You have seen the share green button, yeah?
Yes, but
Okay,
I'm clicking it and
you can open your and then you click. And then you select.
We may upload from our side here if it is a challenge.
Yeah, please, it is a challenge from my side. If someone wants to help, even from your side, I'll appreciate.
We will run it from here.
Okay, then let's tap on that option.
It's a big file. It is still uploading, but in a few minutes we shall have it up on the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
In the meantime, Maurice, you can introduce the work, and then when the slides come, you run it.
Yes, so C3A2 are a set of tools. There are about 8 tools which we applied in Yala wetlands to collect data from the local communities, the local government, and also from the local civil society. And about Yala wetlands, this is one of the great wetlands, and in Kenya it is the largest wetland, and it is a wetland that is a complex of 2 rivers, that is River Yala and River Nzoia. And these 2 rivers, before they drain into Lake Victoria, they form a complex of wetlands called the Yala wetland. So this wetland is very important because, are you done?
Yeah, it's uploaded, so you can take it on. Are you seeing it?
So I can't see it from my side. No, I can't see it from my side.
Screen is shared. You should be able to see it.
Yeah, I'm not able to see it. I'm just seeing a dark screen.
Are you using a desktop? Are you using a laptop?
Yes, I'm using a laptop.
Yes, then you can just open it on your laptop and run it, please, for purposes of time.
Or
Okay.
Tell us just the slide on which you are talking, and then we shall display it here on the screen. Tell us.
I'm on the study area. I'm on the study area. That is Yala wetlands, the one with the map.
Next slide.
The one with the geographical map of the site.
Talk, and when you want us to go to the next slide, just say next slide.
Okay, okay, fine. So let me continue talking on the.
Maurice, listen. So
Yes.
we are on the studies. We are on the study area slide. So you can go on.
Yes.
You can go on from there. Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying is that Yala Wetland is a complex of two rivers which are forming between River Yala and River Nzoia, and they form this complex just before they reach or they drain their waters into Lake Victoria. So the wetland is very important because it purifies the water that enters Lake Victoria, and also it contains some of the sediments that are likely to go directly into the lake. And we all know that Lake Victoria is drained by large rivers, mainly from Kenya, and these are one of the two large rivers. So this this wetland is also an important or biodiversity in the area previously. So the wetland offers ecosystem goods and services to both the biodiversity and also to the poor communities who are living around the site. And wetland faces many challenges, and some of these challenges are thought to be originating from climate change and related issues. Next.
The next slide, go ahead.
Yes, so I've given some, there is massive farming, especially during drought. There is fishing activities. There's also burning of vegetation and also over harvesting of papyrus reeds, which are forming the lifeline for this wetland. Next. Background to the study, to address some of the climate variability and climate change issues in the study area, an NGO called EcoFinder Kenya was provided with support from USAID, and this support was given through the prepared projects, and the support was on promoting climate and ecosystem smart livelihoods for climate change adaptation among Yala wetland communities in Kenya. So we used this participatory set of tools called C3A2 to address some of the project objectives for this large project. Next. So just to give a brief overview of the set of toolkit that is C3A2. So I said this is a participatory toolkit, and we used it to answer questions, around 3 questions, by collecting evidence from the local communities. Okay, so these questions included questions about hazards, that is what, questions about exposure, that is where, and also questions about vulnerability, which you can talk about who and how. Next. So I want just to share with you some of these tools. For example, the first tool was storytelling, and this one was done, or information was used, which was used in the toolkit, was collected from local community and also from the county or district level. So we used interviews as the methodology, and we collected 20 stories at the district or county level, and we collected about 60 stories again at the community level. The second tool is called Adaptation Attributes, and this tool talks about, or it entails interventions and coping mechanisms that are basically about community resilience to climate change and about sustainability. So we use focus group discussions for this. The third tool is community protocol, and this one we use plenary discussions to get the general stories about the community, and also just general history about the community, when they arrived there, what made them to arrive there, and made any other historical changes that have happened within the community for the time they have been existence in that area. Then the third one is the risk mapping, and here we developed 3 maps through participatory processes: the hazard map and the vulnerability map. And the 2 maps, that is the hazard and vulnerability map, we overlaid and we came up with the final map called the risk map. The other one is techno-transect, and this involved moving with a selected few participants and doing photography within the areas. And we targeted areas where there are likely hazards have been identified, okay? And we are also able to identify community vulnerabilities and the capacity for adaptation at the local scale. Next slide. The other tool is resilience ranking. So we use focus group discussions to get information about characteristics of various households on their welfare, names of people who are more resilient and who are less resilient, okay? About community mobility, relations in relation to power, and also rankings in relation to health, to wealth. Then the other tool is community calendars, and under community calendars, we came up with 2 calendars. That is the activity calendar, we talked about livelihoods, adaptation and coping strategies, and the events calendar, whereby the community outlined some of the hazards or risks and ranked them based on their degree of impact. And then the last tool is the give back, and this was presented in plenary discussions, whereby all participants who participated in this survey were able to interact, and also the results of the survey was presented to them, okay? So the proposed interventions were shared and discussed with the communities, and so anything which needed to be changed was changed at this level. Okay, next, I've given you some 2 photos on data collection. So before we did this work, we did a training of trainers for C3A2 enumerators, and we selected people at the local scale, and these people were trained for about 1 week on how to administer these tools. Next, this one, I mean, I've also given some 3 photos which shows how we collected data at the meso level or at the district or county level. The one photo is about storytelling. One of the researchers directly taking stories from one of the government officers whom we interviewed. Then we also did a site visit among the team, and also the other photo is about the government officers, the civil society players who were present and gave their input. Next, I've also given you about 4 photos here on how we did risk mapping, how we did transect walks, storytelling, and community calendar. So you can see these tools are very participatory, and all of the participants participated actively in the process. Okay, so the data analysis for C3A2 was done at 4 levels. So the first one was at pre-analysis in situ, whereby the researchers who collected information for the local community were able to reflect on some of the issues and made conclusions at the end of every session of the day. Then we had the daily team triangulation, whereby all the researchers will come together, and so they will interact and talk about some of the important issues that they came across, and where there was any issue to be corrected, they will correct this one amongst themselves. Then the teams will make conclusions so that before they go to the next community, they will have had an agreement which was which was encompassing, and so when they move to the next community, they are able to correct any anomalies that they experience in the current community. Then there was also cross-reporting, because we did this work among 3 villages or communities, and so whoever did work in a different community would make the information they received be comparable among the 3 communities. Next, we also did validation, and validation was done at plenary level, whereby all people will participate for the different tools that they were engaged in providing information for. Then some of the study findings, we outlined some of the local manifestations. That is next slide. Some local manifestations or community knowledge and perceptions about climate change. For example, the communities agreed that the prolonged period of heavy rainfall would mean an oncoming period of drought. Okay, so if we had heavy rainfall in this period, then the community was getting more prepared for an oncoming drought, maybe in the next year or in the next few months. Okay, others included information about strong winds, about how crops are faring on now and before. Okay, about drought. Okay, and even about loss of vegetation species and also replacement of some vegetation, and even species like birds, some of them are disappearing. Okay, next slide. So some of the key hazards that were identified by the communities and through the tools were 5. So drought was ranked number 1, although that is a wetland area. Then flooding number 2, soil erosion, human-wildlife conflict, diseases or human, livestock, and crop diseases. Okay, so in order for the researchers to determine the vulnerabilities within the community, the following were also assessed. We are looked at the exposure levels. We also looked at the impact of the hazards and also the coping mechanisms. Okay, so this is just an example. Next slide. I gave an example here on how various sectors, we identified 4 sectors which are affected by climate change, and the key result area was on drought. So we looked at agriculture and food security, health, terrestrial ecosystem, water and aquatic ecosystems, and looked at the impacts, the coping mechanisms, and also which kind of people or which kind of of entities were exposed to some, that were affected directly by the impact of the sectors. Next. So we applied these findings in various ways. One, the first application was on identification of climate smart livelihoods. Okay, and some of the things that we did included, we developed training manuals and also trained people at the trainers level. Then we also developed a strategy for communication and outreach approaches, whereby we were able to enhance awareness on climate change at the local scale. Then another one is on implementation of prioritized livelihoods. So the communities were engaged and they were able to prioritize about 3 livelihoods, which were later on funded for implementation by the donor, that is USAID. Then finally, we developed 3 community-based climate adaptation action plans. Okay, next slide. So I've given you some of the pictures of the livelihood training manuals that we developed. Next slide. I've also given you how communities were trained on various livelihoods which were identified. I've also given you, next slide, some of the livelihoods that were supported. For example, water harvesting was promoted, okay, by rehabilitating some of the wells and also provision of water tank for the local secondary school, where people will get some water for domestic use. Next slide. I've also given you how the findings were applied, specifically on how we developed the community-based adaptation action plans, okay, how we identified the problems, the hazards, the available options which were agreed upon, and also the responsible authorities or entities, okay, the required resources on the plan, and also the action or the action plan matrix or the implementation matrix. Okay, so in conclusion, I can say that the C3A2 participatory tools can be used to lay foundation for climate adaptation planning and resilience building at the local community and at the county or district scales. Okay, so we recommend that the participatory C3A2 process could be used to identify, prioritize, and implement climate smart livelihoods within the Nile Basin. Okay, then the second recommendation is that local perceptions, adaptation, and resilience knowledge provides key information in facilitating community-based adaptation action plans and implementing community-based adaptation projects. And finally, we recommend that local structures, okay, could be used. This can be structures like hazards or disaster committees or village environmental committees. This could be enhanced if they are already available in study communities, so that they can be used for management of climate-related challenges at projects level. Last slide. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Maurice, for your presentation on the application of this tool on Yala wetland. Kindly, there are a lot of questions about these presentations by Jonas and by you in the Q&A, and also some in the chat. Please try and respond to them. Dear listeners, now we are moving on to the final section of this webinar, and it is the panel discussion. And within our panel, as I said earlier, we have two officers from Global Peatlands Initiative, and that is Diana Kopansky and Brian Atkins, who will respond to some of the questions we have already prepared. And then, of course, from the government of Kenya, we have Derek Senyonga, who is from the Ministry of Water and Environment, Department of Climate Change. And then from the government of South Sudan, we have Paul Dimitri, who is the Deputy Director for Biodiversity and is also the focal point for CBD. So welcome the panelists. And to get the ball rolling, I will have the first question to the Global Peatlands Initiative. And this question is that, how can Nile Basin countries benefit from the work and support of the GPI, of the Global Peatlands Initiative? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leonard, and it's great to see you again. I hope you're doing well, and I'm really happy to be here today. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, wonderful. And congratulations. I think it's such an incredible forum for our partners like the Greifswald-Myers Center, Remote Sensing Solutions, Wetlands International, to really share the incredibly diverse and important work that you've been doing with the kind support from GIZ and also a lot of great collaborative financing. Some of you might know, but not know, but the Global Peatlands Initiative is a partnership that was started at the end of 2016 at the UNFCCC COP in Morocco. And it was really the result of the Indonesian peatland fire crisis. And they called to international organizations, including United Nations Environment Program, to really get the support they need to tackle their climate emergency through their degraded, drained, and burning peatlands. And so the partnership was founded with 13 core founding members. And less than 4 years, we are 41 international partner organizations, including the Nile Basin Initiative since March 2020. We're directly supporting a number of countries, but also available to advise and support all countries of the world. You might not be aware, but at the United Nations Environment Assembly in March 2019, all countries of the world are starting to pay attention to peatlands, and they've made a commitment to work together intersectorally and interdisciplinary to work to conserve and sustainably manage peatlands. And I think that, you know, some of the points that were raised are really poignant. The Nile Basin Initiative can tap into our partnership of 41 different organizations for support, either that be on working on the NDC, I've shared some content in the chat, or to also join in with the South-South collaborative approach that we're using. UNEP and the partners have been bringing our 4 Global Peatlands Initiative pilot countries together of Indonesia, the Republic of Congo, DR Congo, and Peru, but there is much more space for others to join in, and we have been getting interest. So I think through the partnership and through UNEP's coordination, we can help get you access to the right partner and the right content, whether that's technical or looking at financing or looking at best practice approaches. with partners like FAO. We're here for you. So please do reach into us, and you have a great team as well at the Nile Basin Initiative that can contact us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. I will have the next question goes to Paul Dimitri from South Sudan. Paul, what are the main threats and pressure affecting the Sudan, South Sudan peatlands and wetlands? And in your opinion, what should we do about it? Yes, Paul.
Thank you very much, Leonard, and I'm very happy to participate in this seminar, and the webinar online. Based on the questions that you have put across, especially in regards to the threats, there are so many threats that we are encountering, especially within the Sud wetland. And one of them is the huge extractive industries that are operating within the wetlands, especially the biggest of all is the oil extraction and the oil exploration and extraction, which is actually damaging the biggest part of that wetland and the peatlands that we have in the country. To address some of these challenges that we have in the wetland, we need to have a comprehensive wetland management plan for that particular wetland, especially the Sud wetland, apart from the other wetlands that we have not yet mapped them or put them into an inventory. So at the moment, the only wetland that we have, and we know some information about it, is the Sud wetland that we have. But there are a number of things, including the management plan, and then also including the raising of awareness of what a wetland is or what a peatland is. So it's still a challenge even for us to be able to bring on board all the stakeholders so that they understand what a wetland is and how does it contribute into the sustainable development of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The next question is to Derek Senyonga from Uganda. Derek, maybe you can open your camera if it's okay. But the question is that if you look at the peatlands and the wetlands in Uganda, what are some of the biggest threats that the peatlands face in your country? The peatlands ecosystem, the wetlands ecosystems, what are some of the biggest threats they are facing, or some of the major threats that they are facing? Derek.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator, for this opportunity. One of the biggest threats for wetlands in Uganda, as my colleague from South Sudan has said, one is on population explosion. You can, by statistics, in Uganda is one of those countries with the highest population growth, with a rate of 3.2 per annum. So this has almost tripled from 1980. In 1980, it was 12.6 million. Then 2014, 34.8. So now it's about 45. So this exerts a lot of pressure on wetland resources. So the pressure in this case has resulted in tendency for people to move to what is perceived as free land. And the wetlands, in this case, wetlands and peatlands, are perceived to be free land. And this has been more evident in southwestern part of Uganda, where rich farmers acquired leases for terms up to like 99 years. So this has led to the degradation of most of the vast wetlands in that part. And of course, it has resulted also for it has resulted to demand for settlement. People look for where to settle in those what they perceive to be free lands. Similar to what my colleague has said from South Sudan, industrial development. As I said earlier, wetlands have traditionally been seen as vast, cheap, and encumbered land available for development. So the allocation of wetlands for industrial development, for instance, through the Kampala Development Plan of 1972, set the stage for wetlands encroachment in most parts of the country. So these industries put pressure on wetlands through heavy pollution, burden, and drainage for infrastructure development. We have also evidenced the reclamation of these wetlands through industrial development. And this is most evident in Kampala City and most of the cities, most of the wetlands that surround the cities. So this has been really a great problem to the wetland. The third thing in Uganda is hello.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay. Are you done?
No, not yet.
Okay.
The third issue is the complex land ownership issues.
Okay.
The government organized the conservation of wetlands, and it remains the trustee of its resource. However, the constitutional provision of 1995 did not take care of the ownership matters, especially those pertaining, for example, the minor land ownership. So the government has tried to implement this constitution, but there is unclear demarcation of who owns what. So in most cases, when it comes to wetlands, there's that unclear demarcation where someone could go for utilizing the wetland and where someone should stop. So the land ownership complexities have led to the encroachment of these wetlands severely. Another issue is the introduction of rice. Rice is regarded as a new crop since it was brought in 1960s. So a number of industries, for example, the Kibimba irrigation scheme in eastern Uganda has now spread as a major crop in that region, in eastern region, to cover a number of wetlands. So the clearing of wetlands for rice has resulted into loss of biodiversity and a number of wetland functions.
Okay.
Thank you very much for those. Are some of the key challenges that face wetlands and peatlands in the country.
Thank you so much, Derek, for those for listing those challenges or threats with regards to wetlands and peatlands in Uganda. I will come back again to Diana and Brian, and the question is that having in mind the Nile Basin Initiative and having in mind also the Nile Basin countries, and also and with regard to sustainable peatlands management, what are some of the strategies, what are some of the advice you will give to the Nile Basin and the counties that they work on, they could focus on to enable sustainable peatlands management? Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much again for that question, Leonard. And I would say most countries already have laws and regulations and policies that can be used appropriately to really check what sort of developmental decisions or permissions are being given in environmental impact assessment, so strategic environmental impact assessment is foundational and fundamental. And I think that that's really something that needs to come back into the fold in decision-making for governments. Policies as well, all countries of the world have agreed to make a commitment to look at peatlands, pay more attention to them, and work towards their conservation, restoration, and sustainable management. So then absorbing that policy within your country, absorbing those commitments, and making plans that include peatlands and their unique nature. Peatlands are covering only 3% of the world's surface, estimated. And the carbon that they store, just the carbon, I'm not talking about all the other incredible ecosystem services they provide, the carbon that they store is twice as much as all the world's forests. And we really need to prioritize them because only a fraction of the world's peatlands are degraded. So it's not a big ask to ask countries to know where their peatlands are and understand how they're changing. And the work of Wetlands International, Greifswald-Meyer Center, and Remote Sensing Solutions, and others like Ramsar, the mapping and understanding, just knowing what peatlands are, where they are, and understanding how decisions that you're making can impact their health is really quite vital. So peatlands offer really a triple win, both for climate, for people and the planet, for biodiversity and water and resilience. And I think that through this recognition, you can also count on private sector partners and investors to also put more money into peatlands and their restoration. We're seeing a lot of commitments from other countries like Indonesia, Peru, and even Germany and the UK, recognizing that the way that they've treated their peatlands is really damaging their people, their health, and their well-being, and also in the climate future, that uncertain and really climate emergency that we're in, paying attention to peatlands is even more important. So I would say that really reach out to those experts and make sure that you reach across sectors, you reach across your academic, also your academic disciplines, because we need all hands on deck actually to make real progress towards climate change and also the other commitments that are so important for the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks so much.
Brian, do you want to add something?
Thank you, Leonard. I would echo what Diana said, but without repeating everything that she said. I think one of the key opportunities that countries in the region need to be looking at, and which we would promote as the GPI, is looking at leveraging the conservation of and restoration of peatlands in the NDCs and including them in their NDCs, and that type of action is critical to the future of all of the countries in the Nile Basin initiative. I think that there's a number of opportunities toward doing that, and the Paris Agreement and Article 6 was mentioned earlier by Suri, and these are definitely areas that need to be explored more thoroughly. And as the Global Peatlands Initiative, we intend to keep pulling resources together in terms of new publications, new research, and promoting the use of peatlands as conservation areas, as areas for restoration potential, and obviously for sustainable management as well. So there are lots of these types of opportunities, and it's a really exciting time to be talking about peatlands. It's a really exciting time to be working on what has been forgotten as a solution to climate change and as a solution to many of other developmental challenges for so long. So prioritizing peatlands is something we continue to work on, and we will continue to push forward with, and we look forward to pushing forward with those things together with many of the people on this call.
Okay, I'll move again to Paul Dimitri. Paul, we all know that South Sudan is a very young country, and that if we look at the Nile Basin, South Sudan has got some of the, from summer presentation, you noted that South Sudan has some of the great resource in terms of peatlands, but also wetlands. And these are very key, not only to South Sudan, but also to the Nile Basin. So listening here are our partners from various organizations. So briefly, if we have to work on the peatlands and the wetlands of South Sudan, what will be the priority areas, or what should be done to ensure that those peatlands and wetlands of South Sudan are conserved? What will be the priority areas for South Sudan with regards to peatlands and wetlands? Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much again, Leonard. I think in terms of the priorities, after listening from colleagues, the most important things that we need to start with is to do the mapping of the wetlands and the peatland resources that we have in the country. We have a number of wetlands. Most of them are not known, and they are of international importance, especially the Sud wetland and the Mashar marshes with the border in Ethiopia. I mean, with the border with Ethiopia. It has a lot of potentials in terms of ecosystem services, regionally, globally, and internationally. So the first priority will be to map them and look at where they are in the country, and then also do some analysis in regards to what are the threats that are there, and then see the wise utilization of these resources. And I think it came also in a very crucial time, this seminar, especially that South Sudan is working on the national determined contribution. And the first initial national determined contribution, we didn't even include wetlands in the mitigation and adaptation processes. But now that we are going to validate the national determined contribution, the wetlands and the peatlands are going to be taken care of. I think we're going to, as a Directorate of Wetlands and Biodiversity, and as a country, we are going to put a lot of emphasis on these resources. So we need to map them, know where they are, so that we are able to utilize them wisely and conserve them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And of course, finally, to Derek from Uganda. Uganda is currently revising its NDC. So do you see room for incorporation of wetlands and peatlands in that? And yeah, so do you see more room for incorporation of wetlands and peatlands in the NDC, which is being revised or which is being finalized by Uganda now?
Yes, thank you very much. Definitely, there is more. Yes, hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, there is more room for incorporating. Yes, there is more room for incorporating wetlands and peatlands in the NDC revision. For your information, in the first NDC, that was submitted in 2015, wetlands were highly incorporated, and the current ongoing process of revising the second NDC has just started actually. We are starting with stakeholder consultations. So issues concerning wetlands and peatlands are really going to be cared for, given the fact that we want also to increase our NDC ambition. So we hope that the wetlands, we're going to have more actions to put forward. And then what I also want to add is that the previous NDC did not specify the wetlands and peatlands. So we hope that in this current NDC, there will be the recognition of peatlands in as a carbon stock for carbon dioxide. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Derek, and thank you so much for our panelists. I think we will end it there, and now give my colleague Sadiq Kiloth a chance to give us a wrap-up message, key messages that we have generated through this 2 hours webinar. So Sadiq, please briefly sum it up for us, and then we will end this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard, and thank you, colleagues, for very good, insightful discussion throughout the whole session, almost a 2-hour session, which is quite informative in the peatlands as a constituent or an important component of the wetlands in the region. Indeed, the presentation and the discussions made were quite insightful, and I have captured few of the key messages and actions that may require our further attention in the region, and of course globally by support, technical and of course financially. One of it emanating from the first 2 presentation is that climate change is contributed by drainage of the peatlands, and on the other way, future climate change will also be exacerbated by impacts which are being put on peatlands, and of course vice versa. As mentioned, that lakes and seas are moving, are exposing the peatlands, of which they will bring so much impact on peatlands and of course on climate change. But a very important and encouraging message we got from the presentation is that paludiculture will be the best solution to peatland management, rewetting the wetlands, maintaining the current peatlands in its hydric condition is quite important. And therefore, this can be a very good way forward in managing the peatlands in the Nile Basin region. But more importantly is also the transfer of the technology from the south in paludiculture is also noted that it could assist in peatland management. And tropical countries, of course, in the Nile Basin are urged to include peatland management to the national determined contribution in climate change, and of course, the voluntary national contribution. And Nile Basin countries are urged to collaborate with the Global Peatland Initiative to support countries in the region in sustainably managing wetlands and of course, in particular, peatlands. NBA can also tap on the partnership on support from the partner institution like the FAO on working towards national determined contribution and South-South collaboration in terms of technical support and financial support. And finally, the very important point mentioned during the round of panel discussion is that countries in the Nile Basin may need to enforce their laws for the strategic environmental assessment and environmental impact assessment in all the projects that will be actually impacting the peatlands. And therefore, countries need to commit themselves in terms of strategic planning and resource portioning for the peatlands. Thank you, and back to you, Leonard.
Thank you so much, Sadiki, for the key messages and for excellent summary. Dear listeners, dear speakers, dear panelists, this marks the end of this second webinar under the Transponded Wetland Management Series in the ongoing NBDF Nile Basin Development Forum. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution, and we welcome you again for the other webinars in the entire NBDF, and also specifically for those which are running under the transboundary wetlands management. Thank you. Bye-bye. Enjoy your evening or enjoy your morning, wherever you are listening from in the part of the world. Thank you. Bye-bye and asante sana.
Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks to Leonard. Bye-bye.
Asante sana.
Thank you.
Great session, Leonard. Thanks a lot.
Thanks
and
so much.
team.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Okay,
Good luck, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you so much. Great. Sadiki, asante sana. Those are animals you came with from Tanzania.
No, these are the Rwandese wildlife one.
Which ones are those?
Rwanda is rich in wildlife, I can assure you.
I thought you carried those from Magufuli.
Not really. These are ours from here.
Okay, okay. Thank you so much. That was a good summary.
Asante, karibu.
Okay.